Today's daf is Chulin daf Vav. And we are 20 lines from the bottom of Daf Heya Midbeis Simin Niklaf. Today's daf is being learned as a schus refuah shalema for Eliezer Yeshaya ben Brach. So we're moving along in the beginning of Maseches Chulin, discussing the very first line of the Masechta, Hakol Shoichten Ushchitasan Ksheir. Specifically, Hakol La'asuye Mai. We saw 6 different pshatim amongst Amayra. La'asuye Tomei, La'asuye Kuti, La'asuye Mumur Eichel Nevelois Liteyav, La'asuye Mumcha She'enei Muchsik, Muchsik She'enei Mumcha. Additionally, the Gemara digressed a little bit, Me'inyan, Le'inyan, very much Ba'oisa Inyan, to talk a little bit about the La'asuye Kuti, to talk a little bit about the La'asuye Mumur Eichel Nevelois Liteyav. Today's daf is going to go back to the La'asuye Kuti. In fact, today's daf is not just going to discuss Kutim as it relates to Shchita, but today's daf is an insight. It's a daf that requires an asterisk in terms of understanding Klolei Hashas, and that is, today's daf is going to give us the rest of the story in terms of how it is that Chazal treated the Kutim. So I think it's kedai just to give a very brief introduction to the Kutim. This is something that we've gone through B'chabura at length several times. We talked about it a little bit even here in the beginning of Maseches Chulin. But being that the primary topic of today's daf are the Kutim and the historical placement of the Kutim, it's kedai just to refresh our memory and Be'ezer Hashem, hopefully segue smoothly into the daf. So, the Kutim were a group of people that were brought by Shalmaneser, king of Ashur, during the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, from the land of Kuta to Eretz Yisrael. The background was Shalmaneser was the infamous king who had exiled the Aseres Hashvatim, and he felt that to leave the whole northern part of the country vacant was not smart. So he felt that he didn't want the Jews there, but at the same time, he had to replace them with other people. So he gathered people from different lands, like the Navi says, and he brought them there. One of the places from where he took people was from Kuta, and apparently they were a chashuva component of this group of people, to the point that all these people became known as the Kutim. Now, the Kutim came from different lands. They were pagans. They were oivdei avodah zara. However, the Navi says that at some point their lives started becoming at a point of great risk. Specifically, there were lions, this is very old school, that came and started eating people up. And they took it as a sign of from God. We're living in the land of the Jews, which means that we have to worship the God of the Jews. And they took it upon themselves to convert to Judaism. They became Geir. Now, there was a big machloikis amongst the Tanaim and even later amongst the Amoraim whether or not this Geirus was a sincere Geirus or was it not a sincere Geirus. On the one hand, they were Megayer, but then again, they only did it because they were afraid of the lions. So were they Geirei Emes or they were Geirei Arayas with an Aleph? They were only Geirei Machmas Yira, and as a result, it wasn't sincere. And it's for that reason, when you learn the sugis of Kutim throughout Shas, it's always a little bit confusing, because in some sugis, the Kutim are Yidden, in some sugis they're not Yidden, and always the first question you have to ask yourself, anytime you see the word Kuti, this Manda Amar, this Brisa, this Mishnah, this sugya, is it of the opinion that the Kutim were Geirei Emes, in which case the Kuti that we're talking about is a Yid, or maybe it's of the opinion that they were Geirei Arayas, which means the Kuti de jour is really not a Yid. He's really in Eina Yehudi. Now, one thing is clear. Whether the Kutim were Geirei Emes or Geirei Arayas, to a very large degree, they did their own thing. Ad Kitei Kach, they did their own thing. They actually fabricated and created their own little Messiah. It evolved to the point where, if you were going to generalize it from a high level, they said that we accept the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu revealed himself at Har Sinai to all the Yotzei Mitzrayim, and that he appointed Moshe Rabbeinu as a shliach to be his messenger, and that the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu taught the Yidden was Misinai. However, only the Torah Shabiksav, and not the Torah Shabal Peh, which meant that from a pure customary perspective, the way the Kutim lived their lives, despite the fact that, according to many, they were Geri Emes, they were Yidden, but it was very, very different from the way that the rest of Klal Yisrael lived their lives, which puts the Kutim into another unique bucket, and that is a sect of Yidden that believed in the Torah Shebiksav and not the Torah Shebal Peh. The most notable of that sect are the Tzedukim and the Baisusim, and years later in the times of the Gaonim and the Rishonim, Uberoshim, the Rambam, the Karaim. And that's why the Kutim, they come up in the sugis of Geras, whether Geri Emes or whether Geri Arayas, and they also come up in the sugis of the people that were Makrish, the Torah Shabal Peh, because really that's another one of the hats that they infamously wore. So they're part of that group of Tzaduk and Baisus and Anan, the Kariai, and they fall into that category as well. Just to mention two interesting nuances that relate to the Kutim. Number one, their Ksav is Ksav Ivri and not Ksav Ashuris. So we know that when the Torah was given the Chatchila, it was given B'Ksav Ivri. But the Gemara says in Sanhedrin Daf Chaf Aleph, Ruya Hoise Ezra Shetinasin Torah Al Yadai, Va'afal and Ezra was the one that introduced Ksav Ashuris, the Ksav, the way we have it today. Well, the Kutim weren't Mekabel the Messiah from Ezra, and as a result, they still had what the Ksav was in this man of Bayis Rishon, and that's why they always kept the Ksav Ivri. Another big point, which is going to feature in today's daf, that made the Kutim unique, is that they believed that the holiest city in Eretz Yisrael is not Yerushalayim or HaKodesh, but rather it's the area of Shechem. And the holiest place within the holiest city is not the Har HaBayis, it's not Har HaMoriah, but rather it's Har Gerizim. And the reason they were even able to entertain such a possibility is because, as we discussed at length during the Yarchei Kala, the Torah doesn't mention anywhere Yerushalayim. The Torah doesn't mention anywhere the Har HaBayis. The Torah says that when you're going to come to Eretz Yisrael, there's going to be a Makom Asher Yivchar, and that place is going to be the place. Well, that's pretty open language. And the Kutim believe that being in Pashas Kisavai, Torah makes a very big deal about Har Gerizim and Har Evel. Har Gerizim is Har Bracha, and Har Evel is the mountain of the Klala. So they had this understanding that what is the Makom Asher Yivchar? It's one of those two mountains that are featured very prominently in the end of Devarim, and specifically the Har Bracha. It's probably not the Har Klala, and that's why their inyan was very much associated with Har Gerizim. As a matter of fact, the Gemara says in Masechtas Yuma Daf Samech Tes that at some point they built a proper temple on Har Gerizim that was destroyed by Alexander Mukden. This is, again, something that the Gemara talks about in different places. But the bottom line is, this is the very, very brief origin of the story of the Kutim. Now it's interesting. B'meshach HaDoros, as we're going to see in today's daf, the Chachamim got together and they decided that, I know for years we couldn't get along on this topic, with the Kutim Gerei Emes or with the Gerei Arayas. However, Nimnu V'Gamru, moving forward, a Kuti will no longer halachically be considered a Yid. So that regardless of whether we took the position for 1,000 years that the Kutim were Gerei Emes, or whether we took the position they were Gerei Arayas, that was all heretofore. But moving forward, you want to know how we're going to treat the Kutim? We're for sure going to treat them like a Yehud. Now, at first glance, Kana ben Shail, how could you do that? What does that even mean? If the Kutim are Yidden, they're Yidden. Now, after learning yesterday's daf, which by the way is the segue into today's daf, we can maybe hypothesize a little bit. Maybe, being that the Kutim were not behaving properly, they were probably Mechal Shabbos B'Farhesia. It's Yitachin that they were Mumar L'Avodas Keichavim. Could be they were even Mumar L'Chal HaTeirah. And we know all these people are Dinei Ka'ovdei Keichavim. And that would be the simplest answer to explain how the Chachamim would have a gerech to do something like this, and that's going to be the pashtus in the Gemara that we're about to learn. We're giving it away, spoiler alert. But the point is, as we'll see, that's for sure what this inyan was rooted in. But it doesn't satisfy the question. And the reason is because there are rayas from Shas that the Kutim from Chulin Davav forward were treated like Ein Yehudim was not just l'chumra, it was l'kula as well. We took away their status as a yid 100% bein l'chumra, bein l'kula. This idea that a Mechal Shabbos b'farhesia is treated like an Ein Yehudi doesn't mean that all of a sudden he's a non-Jew, and if he wants l'chatchila to go eat nevel on Yom Kippur, this is something he can do. Because we know ben kach kriyim banim, and we know afa pisha chatu yisrael him, and of course it just means in certain areas of halacha we can't unfortunately treat him like a yid, because he doesn't treat himself like a yid. So what are you supposed to do? But at the same time, avadi, you want to know if he's a yid. But the kutim were unique because afilu l'mando amar kutim geirei emes, but they were treated no longer as Yidden, they were treated mamish 100% like Oivdei Kechavim, and that's Taka Pella. So, the Marmakim to this is the Hilgach Sam Sofer, who said a Dover Pella. It's such a Dover Pella that we once mentioned, there Moshe Feinstein in Dibros Moshe writes, in one of his Shiurim, he says that he believes this is a Toys. It was written by a Talmud Torah. You have to be Meichikir. Moshe used to do that often, Kiyodua. But the bottom line is, Moshe said that there's no way in the world that this is Emes. So what did Sam Sofer say? That it elicited this hergish from Moshe, can't even be true. He said that we know, Chazal say that Hefker Bezdin Hefker. Now, what's the Makar to Hefker Bezdin Hefker? So the Gemara in Gittin brings two different Makaris. One of them is, we learn it from the story of Ezra and Nehemiah. The Pasuk says that when the Yidden came to Eretz Yisrael, after 70 years of Galus Bavel, so it was Yontif and Devachim. They weren't behaving like Yidden. And Ezra said that in 3 days, I want everybody to come to the town square, and we're going to make a new bris, a new covenant, where once again, we're going to renew our vows with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We'll bring Karbanos, the Paral and Davashal Tzibur, and through that, we're going to somehow get ourselves out of this situation, and we're going to be able to find favor again in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then he made a threat, did Ezra. He said, any person that doesn't come within 3 days, Yachram kol rechushai, says the Gemara, Ezra said that whoever doesn't come in 3 days, I'm going to take away all his money. Has Ezra ever right to take away all his money? Oh, you see from here, Hefker Bezdin Hefker. So the Hilchos Sam Sofer said that read the next words of the pasuk. Yachram kol rechushay v'hu yibadal mikal hagoyla. So pasha means v'hu yibadal mikal hagoyla. We're going to deport you, right? That's what it sounds like. It sounds like we're going to revoke your citizenship. It sounds like we're going to be pirish you from the tzibur. But Tzedek Sam Sofer, no. V'yubadu mikal hagoyla means literally. And just like you see from this pasuk that Ezra, any Bezdin on the level of Ezra, has an ability to be mafka somebody's nechasim, he also has the ability to take that person and be mavdalim mikal hagoyla, and say that even though you're a yid, we're not going to treat you like a yid anymore. And that Tzedek Sam Sofer is what happened in Chulin Davav. And he says, Ubezem Yoshev Kushis HaTosos Yontif, he's the one who was very matmiyah, how in the world this was even possible. And this is the way you can understand what's going on over here. That Chulin Davav, this idea that Nimnu v'Gomru, that the Kutim should no longer be treated like Yidden, this was something that was done based on the same exact license that gave the Chachamim to employ a Hefker Bezdin Hefker, which of course is a halacha revacha b'Yisrael. Now, our Chabura, when we were in Eretz Yisrael a few months ago, we actually visited the Kutim. Believe it or not, there's still a sheres plate of them, not many. Miyot HaKamos and Miyot HaEchos, as we saw, but they're still drengzich out there, and on some level they hold on to the Messiah. It's a fascinating visit, but either way, on that note, with just again, the briefest version of the introduction to the Kutin, we begin another daf here in the beginning of Masechtas Chulin. All these dafin require asterisks, but specifically Chulin Davav, which has literally cosmic ramifications in terms of Verstehen, Abissal Besser, all the different Gemaras that talk about the Kutin. On that note, Zok the Gemara, Simin Niklaf, Amr Rab Chanin, Amr Rab Yaakov Aridi, Amr Rab Yeshua ben Levi, Mishum Bar Kapara. By the way, we should be getting the hang of this by now. What's the Simin Niklaf? Right, what's the Simin? So it's for the 4 Amoraim that were just mentioned. The Nun is Rab Chanan. The Kuf is the Kuf from Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi. The Lamed is the Lamed of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. And the Fei is the Fei of Bar Kapara. Which, by the way, from the fact that Ravina Ravashi want us to remember who these Amayram are, you see, number one, names matter. We know that. Additionally, see, even the middlemen matter. But either way, Amr Rab Chanan, Amr Rab Yaakov Bar Idi, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Mishum Bar Kapara. Rabbi Gamliel Beis Dinai. Rabbi Gamliel and his Bezdin Nimnu al Shchitas Kuti Vasrua. They said that even though the Mishnah says Hakol Sheichten, and we mentioned the Brisa already twice. Hakol is the Rabbi's Kuti, and we know Abai v'Rava learned it up in the Mishnah Gufa. But the bottom line is, even though really Shchitas Kuti should be mutter in some instances l'chatchila, in some instances only b'di'evet, but Rabbi Gamliel Beis Dinai got up and they said that from this point forward, v'asrua, it's going to be us. Now, the machlekes Rashi and Tosfos who this Rabbi Gamliel is. So we know not all Rabbi Gamliels are the same person. There's Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken, there's Rabbi Gamliel the Yavna, and then there's also Rabbi Gamliel B'noi Rabbi Yehuda Anasi. Rashi says this Rabbi Gamliel is Rabbi Gamliel B'noi Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, who's usually not referred to as Rabbi Gamliel Stam. Number one, he's not mentioned that often in Shas, and when he is, he's Rabbi Gamliel B'noi Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. He's mentioned in a Mishnah and Avos. He's the one that says, Tosfos quotes it, Yafa Teirim Derech Eretz Sheyigia Shnei Mishkachas Oven. That's from the few members we know for Rabbi Gamliel B'noi Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. But Tosfos says it's not mistaber that Stam Rabbi Gamliel would be that Rabbi Gamliel. Therefore, Tosfos says, I believe this is the Rabbi Gamliel the Yavna. Either way, again, from a history perspective, it really matters, by the way, which Rabbi Gamliel this is. But regardless, that's the Gemara, Rabbi Gamliel, Beis Dinai, with Nimnu, and they said, Shchitas Kuti is going to be us. Amalei, Rabbi Zayda, Rabbi Yaakov Aridi. So again, Rabbi Chanan said, Rabbi Yaakov Aridi, said, Rabbi Shua Levi, who said, Rabbi Kapara. But one of the maestrim of this memra is Rabbi Yaakov Aridi. So Rabbi Zera, the great Amir, heard this, and he turns to Rabbi Yaakov Aridi, and he said, Shema lo shama Rebbe, ela b'she'en Yisrael imid al gabav. So again, you heard this from Rabbi Shua ben Levi, from Bar Kapara. Rebbe, I guess he was his Rebbe, he says, you probably heard this only when there's no Yisrael imid al gabav. Meaning, avad if there's Yisrael imid al gabav, then there's no reason that a kuti shchita shouldn't be a good shchita. Narvas, b'chai gavna, when there's no Yisrael oimad al gabav, then it's not going to be okay. Which is mistaber that that's the way it should be. Now in our Mishnah we saw, and in the Brisa, that there could be a possibility, even if there's no Yisrael oimad al gabav, for shchitas kuti to be mutter. How? So eichel kazayis, right? There's an eitzah. But what Rabbi Gamliel's Bezdin knocked out was probably that in the event that there's no Yisrael oimad al gabav, that's when it's not okay. Amalei. So Rabbi Yaakov Aridi heard Rabbi Zera's suggestion. He told him, Dami Haimer Rabban Gimiri Inchi Shmaita. You sound like this is your first day in yeshiva. You sound like you never heard halacha anymore. He says, why? It's such a ridiculous suggestion to think that Rabbi Gamliel was knocking out Kishen Yisrael Oimad Agabav. Why? Because he said, Kishen Yisrael Oimad Agabav, Lemem Rabbi. Right? If there's no Yisrael Oimad Agabav, it's poshut that Shchutas Kuti is not going to be okay. And it's for that reason, if Rabbi Gamliel Beis Dinai were Mechadish something, what were they Mechadish? They must have been Mechadish even if there's the Yisrael Oimad Agabav. Meaning, they said, even though up until this point, Hakol Sheichten was the Rabbi's Kuti, but moving forward, the Shchita of a Kuti, even if he's Yisrael Oimad Agabav, we know he's doing everything 100% okay, it's still not going to be good. So the Gemara says, Kibla Minei or like Kibla Minei. Was Reb Zera Mekabel, Rabbi Yaakov Aridi's understanding or not? In other words, there was a Messiah that Rabbi Gamliel Beis Dinai when Nimna al Shchitas Kuti v'Asrua. Reb Zera wasn't sure if this was like 100%, that's it, a kuti can never shecht, or maybe it's only when there's no Yisrael Oimad Agabav. Right? Yaakov Aridi said, come on, it's pashut, he meant it, even when there's the Yisrael Oimad Agabav. But we don't know what Reb Zera's reaction was. Was he mekabel or was he not mekabel? So the Gemara says, I could bring you a right. Toshmat. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, Rab Asi, and then Rab Asi, Ani Isi es Rabbi Yochanan, Eisra Rabbi Yochanan, Shacham Shchitas Kuti, that he ate from Shchitas Kuti. So again, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is quoting Rav Asi, who's a Talmud Rabbi Yochanan. He says, Ani Isi es Rabbi Yochanan. I saw the great Rabbi Yochanan, and he was eating from a Shchitas Kuti. V'af Rav Asi, and Rav Nachman Yitzchak said, oh, by the way, Rav Asi himself, Acham Shchitas Kuti. He ate from Shchitas Kuti. Now, but Rab Zera heard about this. He heard what Rav Nachman Yitzchak said, and that is that Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Asi both ate from Shchutas Kuti. And he said as follows. What was the pshat they did it? I mean, Rabbi Gamliel Beis Dinai when Nimnu v'Gamru Shchitas Kuti is Asura. So why did they do it? This was what was bothering him. And he had two possibilities. Lo Shmielu. Did they not know that Rabbi Gamliel's Bezdin had knocked out Shchitas Kuti? Because had they known about it, they for sure would have been Makabel. Or maybe they knew about it, but they just weren't Makabel it. I mean, they said, I am aware of the fact Rabbi Gamliel's Bezdin did this, but whatever. We're not Makabel the Psak. This is something that we have to be Makabel. And the Gemara says, after Reb Zera pondered this question, he was Paishat the Shaila. He said, Mistaber the Shmiel It's Mistaber that they knew about it, but they weren't Makabel. Meaning not that they didn't know about it, and had they known about it, they would have been makabel. Because if you're going to tell me that they didn't know about it, but had they known about it, they would have been makabel. How could something like this even have happened? We know that Kadosh Baruch Hu protects even behemten shel tzadikim. Who's the tzaddik? Rashi says the Chamor of Rab Pinchas ben Yair, which the Gemara is going to talk about, by the way, in tomorrow's daf. But that's where the whole story is. But the bottom line is, HaKadosh Baruch Hu protects behemtem shel tzadikim. So certainly the tzaddik himself would be protected. So Rab Zera said it must be. The only way I can make sense of how it's possible Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Asi would have eaten from a shchitas kuti, it's probably because they heard about Rabbi Gamliel's psak, but they weren't makabel. Because if the pshat was they didn't know about it, but had they known about it, they wouldn't have done it. That means klapi them. This is an isser. There's no way HaKadosh Baruch Hu would have been mesaviv for them to do an isser, because hashta behemten shel tzadikim ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu maybe takol al yadam tzadikim atzma like kolshkin. Now time is the Gemara like this, a little cheshbon. Now if you're going to tell me that Rav Yaakov Aridi told Rab Zera that I want you to know Rabbi Gamliel's bez then knocked out shchitas kuti legamri. Not like Reb Zera thought that maybe it was only Kishain Yisrael Lemid Agab. So if you're going to tell me that Reb Zera was not Mekabel there, meaning Reb Zera retained his opinion, and that is that the only time, maybe, Rabbi Gamliel's Bezdin said Aser is Kishain Yisrael Lemid Agabav. So what bothered him so much about what Reb Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, and that is Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Asi both ate from Shchitas Kuti, and he had this whole Chakira. Vishnile, he could have answered for himself, Kan Yisrael Oimed Al Gabav, Kan She'en Yisrael Oimed Al Gabav, that the takon of Rabbi Gamliel was Kishen Yisrael Oimed Al Gabav, and I'm sure the Ma'aseh Shaya, Kachayot, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Asi was when there was Yisrael Oimed Al Gabav. Ella laugh from the fact that he didn't say that, and even though we had two tzadim, but that wasn't one of them. So you see that never even entered his mind that as being a possibility. Shma mina kibla minei shma mina must be that he was makabel what Rabbi Yaakov Aridi said, and that's Rabbi Beidina knocked out Shchitas Kuti 100%, even if there's a Yisrael that's being Oimed Al Gabav, and that's why he was very bewildered what went on over here, and he figured it must have been one or two things. Either Rabbi Yochanan and Rav Asi weren't makabel it, or they just didn't know about it, and he said mistabra de shmiel uvelay kiblu, because hashte behemten shel tzadikim ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu maybe takol al yadan tzadikim atzman loy kolshkein. Either way, what emerges from this first Gemara in today's daf is that Rabbi Gamliel Beis Dinai made a takana that shchitas kuti is aser, and even though hakol sheichten is l'Rabbi Skuti, that's the way it was. But moving forward from Rabbi Gamliel to Beis Dinai, whether it's Rabbi Gamliel b'nai Rabbi Yehuda Nasi or it's Rabbi Gamliel di Yavna, nafkamina historically when this happened, but the bottom line is that was a takana of Rabbi Gamliel u Beis Dinai. Says the Gemara, umay taima gazrabu rabban. What was the pshat? Why did they do this? Like, I don't know, Medina the Mishnah, it sounds like a kuti is allowed to shech. And by the way, why is a kuti allowed to shech? Because kutim gerei emes. Good. Yisrael le'med al gabav, only then lechatchila. Beseder. But the bottom line is, he's not completely disqualified from shechting because he's a yid. So what changed? Then what would have triggered that all of a sudden there's a whole hashkafa chadasha of how we're suddenly going to view the kutim. So the Gemara says that it was predicated by a Ma'aseh Shahaya. Kihad Reb Shimon ben Elazar. And it began with Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Shadri Reb Meir, lasuye chamra b'beikutai. Reb Meir, who was Reb Shimon ben Elazar's Rebbe, sent the Tam Reb Shimon ben Elazar to go to buy wine from the kutim. And he was on his way to the kutim, and all of a sudden he encountered Ahu Saba. By the way, we're going to get into this in the raid, but this is where Tosfos famously says Yesh mefarshim dechol mokem shehu masker Ahu Saba hu Eliyahu. But the bottom line is the Gemara says Ashkechei, a little shout out to Lag Ba'omer there, Ayin Sham. But again, we'll get back to this. So Reb Shimon Elazar bumped into Ahu Saba, and Ahu Saba told him a pasuk. He said that Shlomo HaMelech said in Mishlei, "V'samto sakim biloyecha im bal nefesh ata." He told him that if you're a bal nefesh and you're someone that's careful with what it is that you eat, then you should take a knife and you should put it inside your mouth. In other words, don't eat. That was basically what Rashi says is your cheeks. But you should put a sakin in your mouth, cheek area, meaning he was telling him, you're going to buy wine here from the kutim, this is something that you shouldn't do. So Reb Shimon Elazar went back, he told Reb Meir what he heard from Ahu Saba, the Gazar Aleim. And when Reb Meir heard that, he made exactly, the Gemara says, my time, meaning Ahu Saba must have told Rab Shimon Elazar more than just a pasuk in Mishlei. He probably explained himself a little bit. So what was the explanation? Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak says, this is what he told him. What Ahusabet told him was, he says that there was a demus of a yoina, a getchka, a veidazara that was found on the top of Har Grizim. Why Har Grizim? That's their mokum asher yivchar. And on the top of Har Grizim, they found this demus yoina. They were being oived it, which means they're oived veidazara. Okay, what? Everyone was being oived veidazara? They all lived on Har Grizim. Har Grizim is their haramiriya lahavdal. But what? That's where they all are. The reason Rameir acted upon this is because Rameir is l'shitasi the chayish l'miyuta, because he is chayish l'miyuta. Because once he saw that there were a miyat of kutim that were being oived avodah, see, he said, I don't hold called the parish meruba parish. I'm chayish l'miyuta. So every single kutim might be an oived avodah, and as a result, he said we have to knock out the whole chevra. Right? That's basically what happened. Incidentally, if you take a look at the second Tosfos on Daf Vav Alf, this is also a famous Tosfos. Dibra Mascha B'Rosh HaGrizim. Tosfos says B'Medrash Yeshi Avodas Koichavim Shehit Min Yaakov Tachas Ha'el B'Har Shechem. So you remember we went through this in the Chumash here, that after the whole story of Shechem, before Yaakov Avinu starts continuing to travel, so he takes the Avodah Zarah from the brothers. They had taken it from Shechem and he hid it underneath a tree into the Baim, and this was the Avodah Zarah. It was a demus yoina. This is the rest of the story. The kutim, some of them had found it. They were worshipping it. And now all of a sudden there's mumul Avodah Zarah. We saw in yesterday's daf Tiyufta, the Rav Anon Tiyufta, that a mumul Avodah Zarah has a din of a guy. It's only a miyat. What, they're all being over it? Ramei l'shitasa, he was chayish l'miyuta. And that's why he knocked out the whole chevra. Now the Gemara continues, and the Gemara says, Rabbi Gamliel ubeistinoi nami k'Rameir sfilu. Rabbi Gamliel and their bezin also held like Rameir. That what? V'chayesh limi yuta, and it's for that reason they were also nimna v'gamru. The same psak of Rameir, Rabbi Gamliel ubeistinoi issued as well, based on the fact that again they're also a makabel v'chayesh limi yuta. Once they found the Tmus Yoina, they knew there was already trouble. Says the Gemara. So Hahu Saba quoted a pasuk in Mishlei, V'samta sakim b'loyecha imbal nefesh ata. By the way, if you're not sure that the pasuk is a Mishlei, or maybe using like a Bamber Gemara, we don't see it on the side of the Gemara, Rashi tells you. Rashi says, Dibra maschel v'samta sakim b'loyecha pasaku b'sefer Mishlei. We're not going to go into this, but I am ben a tzutzayav for Abrufim Margolis, who explains why Rashi felt he had to tell you it's a pasuk in Mishlei. Every time there's a pasuk in Tanakh, Rashi doesn't tell you where the pasuk is. Sometimes he does, right? But either way, says the Gemara, Pashti the Grub and Maiksiv. So if you want to know Pashup Pshat in this pasuk, what exactly is it referring to? Meaning, what is the Pshutei Shal Mikra of this pasuk? V'samta sakim b'loyecha imbal nefesh ata. Says the Gemara, but Talmud HaYoshev Lifnei Rabbi. The Pashup Pshat is, it's referring to a Talmud HaYoshev Lifnei Rabbi. The Tani Reb Chia taught in a Braisa, and really, in order to appreciate this, the Gemara now is going to quote the pasuk before it as well. So the pasuk right before V'samta sakim b'loyecha bal nefesh ata says Ki seishev lilchaim es Moishel bin tovin es asher lefanecha, and then it says V'samta sakim b'loyecha in bal nefesh ata. Said Reb Chia and a Bryson that this is Pashup Pshat in this pasuk. If a Talmud sitting with his Rebbe, he has a kasha on something the Rebbe is saying, and he knows that if he asks him the kasha, there's a good chance the Rebbe is going to have it to answer. Bin. Rashi says, Sha'al, you should ask the question. V'imlav. But let's say you think there's a good chance you stumped your Rebbe. Tovin es hasher lefanecha, v'samto sakin biloyecha. Then what you should do is, you should not ask him the question, but rather you should go put the proverbial knife inside your mouth and show some restraint, and don't ask a question that you know he's not going to be able to come up with. Rather, what should you do? Tovin es asher lefanecha. Try to figure it out on your own. Meaning, you should do that. Now, the pasuk continues and says, "Im bal nefesh ata." Right, these are the last words of the pasuk. Proish heimenu. Meaning, if you're a bal nefesh and you want a rebbe who knows how to answer questions, then they'll go find another rebbe. So there's an Indian about nefesh who eats certain things, and he shouldn't learn, from a rebbe that's not going to know how to answer his questions. But the bottom line is that's the safer of the pasuk in bal nefesh ata. Now, where do you see proish heimenu in bal nefesh ata? those are the last words. Proishe menu. So if you take a look at the third Tosfos on the Amud, Tosfos says it's referring to the next pasuk. So v'samta sakim b'leichem al nefesh ata. The next pasuk is al tisav limata moisav v'hu lechem ksavim. Don't eat his lechem. What we're trying to say is proishe menu. But either way, this is the way you read the pasuk. Ki says shev lilchaim es moishel. If you're sitting down, lilchaim to right, is that milashim lilcham or is milashim breaking bread? But either way, ki says shev lilchaim es moishel. If you're sitting down with your Rebbe, bin. Ask, but that's only if you think he's going to be able to answer the question. If you think he can't, Tovin es hashel lefanecha, which goes right into the next pasuk, v'samto sakim b'loyecha, and control yourself. And imbal nefesh ata al tisa l'mata ma'isa, which goes into the following pasuk, that you should go ahead and you should do your own things. Dr. Gemara, another ma'isa, omei inyan le'inyan ba'isen. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Yosef shad Rabbi Vo la'asuyi chamre beikutai. Rabbi Yitzchak ben Yosef was sent by Rabbi Vo to buy wine from the Kutim. And again, he bumps into Ahusaba. Amalei. So Ahusaba told Rabbi Yitzchak ben Yosef, don't buy wine here. Less kan shomrei Torah. There's no shomrei Torah over here. And because there's no shomrei Torah, so I don't think you should buy any wine. Halach Rabbi Yitzchak v'sipir dvarim l'fnei Rabbi Vo. So Rabbi Yitzchak went and he told Rabbi Vo what he heard. Halach Rabbi Vo v'sipir dvarim l'fnei Rav Ami Rav Asi. Rabbi Vo went and he repeated what he heard to Rav Ami Rav Asi. V'lo yizazu misham. They literally didn't get up. Achasam oivdei koichavim gemurim, until they turned them in to oivdei koichavim gemurim. Right? They knocked them out. Says the Gemara. When we say that Rav Ami Rav Asi's Bezdin made the Kutim into Goyim Gemurim, what do we mean? Doesn't mean regarding Shchit v'yayin nesech. Sok the Gemara. Mehasam Gazru Burabanan. Didn't it happen already? It happened by Rab Meir. It happened by Rabbi Gamliel Ubezdine. Which, by the way, if it's Rabbi Gamliel Benoish Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, so that's after Rameir. If it's Rabbi Gamliel de Yavna, then it's way before Rameir. But either way, this is something that for sure goes back to Rameir, and like Tosfos, it goes back few days even prior to that. So what's Rabbi Vo doing the same thing? So the Gemara says, Inu Gazer, it's true. The Tanam had already made this gzera above like kiblu minay. The kutim was such a part of the fabric of the Jewish landscape that it was a gzera that the tzibur wasn't able to be makabel. They weren't makabel the gzera. So it's true, yeah, there were choshev and tzadikim that did it. Reb Meir, Reb Gamliel, right? To name a few, but it didn't matter. This wasn't something they were makabel. Also Reb Ami Reb Asi, where Reb Ami Reb Asi came around, then already Gazru, they made the gzera in Tzveitamol, the kibla meinayu, and they were makabel. By the way, one diak that jumps off the page here a little bit, and that is that when Hahu Saba met Reb Shimon Elazar, this is a few generations earlier, and he told him, don't buy wine from the Kutim. So what did he tell him? He told him, and it was mavu in the Gemara that it was only a Miyah, then it's Rameir, and Rabbi Gamliel Beis Dinah, they're Chayash L'miyuta. By Rabbi Vo's times, you see the situation had devolved to the point. What did he tell him? He told him, Leis kan shomrei Torah. Here, the Olam is no shaykhis. At this point already, they have their own issues. And there was the Yeridas Hadeiris going on there. And he said, this is not something you want to have anything to do with. But the truth is, Enochinami, this takana had started way back when, but it wasn't until the times of Ami Rav Asi that it was cemented 100% to the point with Klal Yisrael and Mekabel on them, that the Kutim are not going to have a din of a Yid. And as we mentioned in the introduction, this is not only we're going to treat them like a mumul kula. No, this is bein lahaka bein lahachmer who yibadol mikala goyla. They were knocked out 100% from Yiddishkeit. Now, the Gemara said that Rabbi Ami Rav Asi's bezdin loizazu misham ad sha'asam ovdei kechavim gemurim. Now, it meant shchita, it meant yayin nesech, because even though these takanas had been made earlier, but like kiblua, but the lashon of ovdei kechavim gemurim, right? Agoy gomer. It sounds like it's more than just that. So what does it mean that they were mamish goyim gemurim? Mai ovdei kechavim gemurim. Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman Yitzchak said it's negei hilchas erevin levatel rishus felitein rishus. So this is where Chulin meets erevin. So just a very, very quick background to this halacha. We're familiar with the concept of a ruvei chatzeres. Ruvei chatzeres means that if you have a whole bunch of people that live in a cul-de-sac that opens up into the same chatzar, the only way you're allowed to carry from your house to the chutzner, from the chutzner to your house, from one house to another house, is if you make a ruvah chatzeris. The reason is because your house is owned only by you, and the chutzner is owned by everyone. It's mishru tefes, and as a result, the chutzner klap of the house looks like a rishus harabim, and gzeira atu haitzah, and maver dal amos b'shus harabim, they make gzeira. So what's the workaround? What's the eight? So you make a ruvah chatzeris. By making ruvah chatzeris, we all become shutfin and everything, and as a result, it works. Now the halach is if one person is not mishtatif to the ruvah chatzeris and knocks out the entire erev. Stating that Chazal made a kula. The kula was that if that one person wasn't mishtatif and it's even Shabbos already, there's an eitzah. You could always be mevatel your rishus or give your rishus b'matan. But Chazal said that only works for a yid, it doesn't work for a guy. If you want a guy to be mishtatif, he can't. He can't be mishtatif in the erev. He can't be mevatel his rishus. He can't be nice in his rishus. What you have to do is you have to be soicher his rishus. You would have to rent it from him. And the reason Chazal did this is the Gemara in Parakadar. It's because we didn't want Yidden to be living amongst Umas Olam, so they thought that if you can't make an erev when there's a guy living in the chutzah, this is a good way to make sure that Yidden are going to live amongst themselves. But either way, when we say that you know what it means? But in addition to all that, what it also means is with regards to the laws of Erevin. And now the Gemara is going to bring a brayse that just depicts this. We learned to the brayse Yisrael, that's a mummer mishamish about the beshuk. Who's mishamish about the beshuk? Meaning he's a shem Shabbos b'far hesi, but he's not a shem Shabbos b'tzina. Mevatel rishos v'nois rishos. He can be mevatel rishos. He can be nois in the rishos. He's included in these laws of bittul. But let's say he's a mechal Shabbos even b'far hesi, meaning even b'shuk he's not shem Shabbos. He can't be mevatel rishos. He can't be nois in rishos. Yisrael nois in rishos and mevatel rishos. U'va'oivek kechavim at sheyiskar. Ketzad had his bittul and his sinas rishos work. Amalei rishusi knuya lecha, rishusi mevutelis lecha, kanav and itzarch liskais. Just by saying those words, it works. You don't need a kinyan. It only works for a yid. It doesn't work for a guy. And that's this Indian that they turned them into kechavim gemurim, even with regards to that halacha excel. So really, this is the midpoint. Second part of the daf will go a little quicker, but this is the midpoint of the daf from the standpoint that this is where the Gemara concludes its discussion of the kutim. And what's the big neufach that comes out of Chulin Davav, in Drittenmul? It's this idea, it's this inyan that even though the kutim historically were the subject of controversy and debate, whether they were Geri Emes or they were Geri Arayas, but Rabbi Gamliel Beis Dinai, Rab Meir Beis Dinai, Rav Amir Rav Asi Beis Dinam, they went ahead and they were geyser and they said that the kutim are going to have a din of Oivdei Kechavim and they're going to be Oivdei Kechavim Gemurim. It's true for Shchita, it's true for Yayin Nesach, it's true even for the Rabbanan, the Gehalachas, a Bittul Rishus, as it relates to Erevin. And as we mentioned, it could be it was true, Bein L'chumra Ubein L'kula. So even though in the Sugya Alein it's Mavur, this sounds more like Yisrael Mummer de Gehalachas, right? The whole Sugya is Shrais Yisrael Mummer de. But if you go through the Sugya a little bit better, you see it's more than that. Either way, Zok the Gemara. So now we're going to have a little bit of a digression, which we'll see is Mei Inya le'inya ba'isenya. Reb Zera of Rav Asi iklu le'pundika d'yoy. Reb Zera of Asi, they were once in a pundik, like a bread and breakfast, in the city of Yoy. Aisu l'kamayo beitzim ha'mitzumakis b'yayin. They served breakfast, and it was eggs that had been roasted, and it was mixed with wine. This is old school. Everything was with wine, right? Ayin the red bites and the Masechtas Avodah Zarah. This is when water wasn't sanitary and scotch hadn't been invented yet. But the bottom line is, everything had wine. This is a breakfast for champions. Regardless, I see the kamayu beitzim amitzumakis b'yayin. Something more Reb Zera lo yochal, Reb Asi yochal. Reb Zera didn't eat it, and Reb Asi ate it. Reb Zera Reb Asi. So Reb Zera turned to Reb Asi and said, "Lechayish malet taruvas demai." He says, "How are you eating this? Don't you know there's a little bit of wine inside of it?" And person that owns this kretschme here is an Amma Aretz, and if he's an Amma Aretz, he's Chashen HaMaisris, and if he's Chashen HaMaisris, the wine is D'mai. So if that's the case, how you allowed to eat this? So the Gemara says, Omalei, Rav Asi told Reb Zera, Lava datoi. So I'll be honest with you, Lava datoi, I didn't chap. You know what, I didn't make the cheshbon. You're saying very good. So Reb Zera heard this. Reb Zera was very disappointed. Reb Zera said, is it possible that this really would have been a problem? And why would it have maybe not been a problem? Because it was a taroivus of Tamaya. But is it possible that a taroivus of Tamaya is aser And Rav Asi would have came to eat it, and this is the second time we have it in today's daf. Hashto behemton shel tzadikim ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mevi takol al yadam tzadikim atzman like kolshkein. How could it be? Via zayidus meglech hazazah. It can't be. So the Reb Zera said, I'm positive. I'm working backwards. I know the answer. I just have to figure out what the source is. It must be that this is not Dmai, and the reason is because it's a Taruvus. And we know in a Taruvus things are more kuladik, and it must be the whole Dmai is a Dirabanan. Now, again, just to set this up a drop better, we know that as much as Dmai is something that was instituted by the Chachamim, but Akalin Shebet Dmai, that's the opening words of Masechtas Dmai. What does that mean? We're very meko when it comes to Dmai. And the reason is because Chazal said they were boidik and they figured out Roiv Amiyah Eretz really used to give Meiser. It was only a miyut. Chazal were chayish l'miyuta, right? Second time today's daf. But the bottom line is, being that it was only a dirabban, it was only a chashash, you find a lot of kulas. So in a taruvis, maybe there's a makam lahaka. Reb Zera surmised just from the fact that he saw Reb Asi eat this breakfast, that must be the halacha. And he said, I'm going to go find the source. Nafik Reb Zera. So Reb Zera went out, he was medayik, the ashkach, and lo and behold, yagati matzasi tamin. He found this mekar, and his mekar is a brayse. The tanya, if somebody buys wine from an Amma Aretz, and the reason he bought it was to put inside his murias. Murias is fish brine. Rashi says, aluntis is potion balaz or pizoshin balaz. Again, some sort of food that has in it a taruvis of wine. Karshinim, or if somebody bought karshinim, that's Michael Behema, lasis mem tchinim, to grind it and to make it into some gemishachts. Adashim, lentils, lasis mem resisin, again, to mash it up and put it in taruvis with a whole bunch of things. Dalach is chay mishum demai. In all these situations, you have to give meiser, meaning you have to treat it like demai. So you bought yayin to put into murias or aluntis, or you put karshinin to make from it chinim or adasha to make from it resis. I don't care that you're going to make a taruvas out of it. If one of the ingredients is bought from an amaretz and it's demai, sechai mishum demai. They ain't tzarich mishum vadai. That's poshit if it's not a shayla of demai. You know for sure no one gave meisos for that. For sure you wouldn't be allowed to eat it. Vein atzmon, stating that if somebody would buy the taruvas itself, you'd go to a takeout store and you would buy the aluntis ready-made. You'd buy the murias. You'd buy the tchinim and you would buy the resisin. You buy it by Rusham, well, in that case, mutarim, it's going to be mutar. And the reason is, but they say taruvis. That being that it's taruvis and there's no Allah of Dmai when it comes to the Rosam. So it's a mafurish price. So you see that if I buy it in an oifen of taruvis, it's going to be okay. Now, what's the nuance you see over here? If I buy it as an ingredient and I make it into a taruvis, it's chal dechi of Dmai when I bought the ingredient. But if I got it as a taruvis when it came into my possession, it was already but taruvis is no problem. That's what happened with the Maiso with Rav Asi. He says, Baruch Hashem, I knew it. There's no way in the world that Rav Asi ever could have been victim to such a need. But the Gemara says, is that true? The Chazal were not goizer on a taruvus of Dmai, right? That's the Maisa Shaykachay with Rav Asi, and this is the Brisa. Freak the Gemara, how could that be? But Tanya, we're going to the Brisa. If somebody gives his neighbor, Shchentoy is a woman, and she's also an Amma Oretz. So if somebody gives his Shchentoy, Isa, Do, Lefois to bake, Vikteir Levashel, or do me a favor, I have this k'teira, can you go ahead and cook something? She doesn't have to be worried for the sa'ar and the tavlin that's inside of it, right? Sa'ar is the sourdough, the tavlin are the spices. You don't have to be worried that maybe she put her ingredients in it and it's shvius, the ingredients, which is also bachila or meiser, which obviously, or if she didn't give meiser, that would be the problem. You don't have to be worried about this. But if he told her, if he said, do me a favor, I want you to go ahead and I want you to put your ingredients inside of it, then he does have to be concerned, mishum shvius or mishum meiser. That's something that's going to be an issue. What do you see from here? That if he stam gives her the food and says bacon, you don't have to be worried that she put her ingredients inside of it, because it's my ingredients. If, however, he tells her, put your ingredients, then you have to be concerned, mishum shvius or mishum meiser. Why are you worried about meiser? It's a taruvis. By the time you get it, it's just an ingredient. You're worried about the sa'ir and the tavlin. These are ingredients. So if they're ingredients, there should be no issue. So the Gemara says two terutzim. Shani hasam, the first chiluk is the kivin the kamala asilim mishalachi command the arbi adayim dami. If he told her, I want you to make it, put the ingredients inside, so when she puts the ingredients inside, she's acting as his shliach, but it's as if it's chal already, the chiv demai, before she puts it inside. When she does it, adayit denavsha, that's when you have the halacha of taruvis demai. But if he's telling her to do it and she's doing it on his behalf, The way Rashi explains it, it's as if he purchased the ingredients and asked her to put the ingredients inside. At that point, it was already chalded. Rafa says a different teretz. Shani sar, the tavlin sar and tavlin are different. The letaima of it, because being that they're there to give it taste, the taima loy bottle, right? They're spices. All the ingredients are there to give it taste. But these are spices. Spices we know in taruvis are never bottle. So a taruvis is only a chilik when the thing in the taruvis is subject to bittul. But being that spices are never subject to bittul, so yeah, it's true, it's an ingredient, but it's not subject to bittul. It's for that reason it's not going to be included. But the Gemara asks a kasha. And that is that you see from here that in the event somebody gives shchentai, Isa lefos v'kteir levashel enei choishesh l'sor v'tavlin shba. You don't have to be worried. Why do you have to be worried? So it's mavur one of two reasons. Either you don't have to be worried because it's taruvis t'mai. By taruvis t'mai, you don't have to be worried. And the reason to be worried is because it's you gave the ingredients, and if you gave the ingredients, it's not going to be an issue. If you told her to put the ingredients inside, then already you would have to be concerned. Why? Isn't it a taruvis of demai? So the Gemara said, tu malchim. Either because, being that she's doing it at your behest, it's as if you asked her to do it. It's as if you took possession of it before she actually put it in. Or it's because it's spices, and spices are never bottled. But that's for sure that if you just give her the ingredients and she gives it back to you, you don't have to be concerned that maybe she swapped out the ingredients. Where do you see that? Because if you have to be concerned that she swapped out the ingredients, that even when you give it to her and you didn't ask her to put it in, maybe there's a little bit of taruvis. And by the way, according to Rafram, who said that midi davidi l'tama is never bottled, even if your whole taruvis tamai is mutter, but not in this case. So you would have a problem. The teretz is lachlufe loichashinon. But the Gemara says, is that true? I have a problem. V'tanan, and this is already a mishnah. If somebody gives his shviger dough to bake, ma'asas shu noisin, he has to give mice before he gives it to her. That shu noitin meant when he takes it back from her, he has to give meiser again. So the shviger, the only thing we need to know about her is that she's an Amoritz. So this shviger is an Amoritz. That Adam, who's a younger man, is giving her the Isa. So the halach is, before he gives it to her, he has to be mafresh meiser. And then when he gets it back from her, he has to be mafresh meiser as well. Now, the reason he has to be meiser before he gives it to her, because you're not allowed to give an Amoritz, that's Choshen HaMeiser, is anything that is Tevel, because we're concerned that he may go ahead and eat from it. Okay, so for sure you have to be Ma'aser Eshu Noisenla. That should not to be many. You also have to be Ma'aser because maybe she's giving you something, that's a problem. So both ways you have to do it. But the Gemara says that I understand why you would have to be Ma'aser Eshu. If you gave the meiser, and this is something that you did, so why do you have to be meiser? Eshehu noitel mimena. L'chayra, we should assume that if you gave meiser before you gave it to her, so meisers were already hufrash. So if meiser were already hufrash, so there's no issue. So the Mishnah reason cheshuda, because she's a chashed that she's mechalefes hamiskalko, because maybe something's going to go bad, and if something goes bad, she's going to go ahead and she's going to be machlef. What do you see from here? You see that an Amoritz is chashed to be machlef. So if an Amoritz is chashed to be machlef, so freit the Gemara, then how could you tell me? If you're going to tell me that it's avidi l'tama and you don't have the kula of taruvas demai, you should be chayish for maybe she was machlech. And what are you going to tell me? You see from anois and lechamoisoi that the halach is even though you were ma'aser it before you gave it to her, but you have to be ma'aser it again when you take it back. So the Gemara says, now there it's different. They were dealing with the shviger. Hasam kid Tanya Taima Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said, "Roitzi b'takonas bita u'boishem mechasana." Could be if she's going to bake the cake, she's going to bake the challah. It's not going to come out so geschmack. She's going to switch it. You know why? Because she wants the good from her daughter. She doesn't care so much about the Edom, it doesn't sound like, but she's embarrassed from the Edom. But the bottom line is, now only kidding. The bottom line is, Roitzi b'takonas bita u'boisha mechsana, and it's for that reason, over there there's an issue. But the Gemara says, well, tell me dafka, when it comes to the shviger, that's when you have this, but a regular person, and Amoritz, and again, that's the basis for Anoisin Isa. Says the Gemara, Vatana, we learned in another Mishnah, Anoisin l'pundikis. Shalai, if somebody gave his pundikis, so we're dealing here with, again, a yeshiva bacher, a Talmud Chacham who was living by a pundikis. So he gave the Isa to the pundikis to go ahead and bake. The same exact halacha. And over here, not dealing with the shviger, there's no daughters, there's no edims, there's no bushes, there's no roitzi, betakana. So what would be the pshat over here? So the Gemara says, no, you're dealing with a woman that is the balach achsanya for a Talmud Chacham. Murya v'amra. She's actually going to be mereheta. She's going to say, Barbe Rav lechal chamima v'ane ana echal karira. I want him to eat the good and I should eat the not so good. And it's for that reason they were chayish. But ordinarily, we're not chayish. Make the Gemara. One last crack. And you're so convinced l'chalufe leichashina v'atanya b'lun to the brayse eishes chaver teichenes and eishes ha'ma'aretz. And eishes chaver is allowed to be teichenes. She's allowed to work in the kitchen together with an eishes ha'ma'aretz. Bizman shmit mei. Only when she's tummy. Avod le bizman shmit not when she's tar. What's the reason? So again, it's hard to visualize this because we don't live in a world of tumah v'tayra. But once upon a time where tumah v'tayra was prevalent with regards to food, so a woman that was tummy knew she wasn't allowed to touch food. If she was tar, she was allowed to touch food. To work in the kitchen together with amaret, you may be eating food that you're not allowed to eat, food that's enemoser. So says the Brisa, if the Eishes Chaver is tameh, she's not going to touch the food anyway, so that's fine. If she's tar, then already you have to be concerned because maybe she's getting. Reb Shimon ben Elazar said, even when she's tameh, she shouldn't. Because even though she has her instincts to know not to touch the food, but the chavrita might give her the food, and if she gives her the food, she's going to go ahead and eat. Now, for the chavrita to go ahead and give her the food is not okay. The reason it's not hers. Whose is it? This is old school. It's her husband's. So, unless the husband signs some sort of release, she has no right to go ahead and give the food. Elamai, the Ishes Ama'aretz is chashad on gzela. Freit the Gemara, hashta migzal gazla chalufe mibaya. If she's chashad on gzela, certainly she should be chashad on chalipin. Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef said that no. La'olam l'chalufe lo'chashinon. Why over there? Yeah. Hasamnami murya v'amri oturi midisha ka'achol. This is an expression, a shar, when it's out in the field, there's allowed to eat from what it is that it's threshing. But the point is, the nimshal is that being that I'm working in the kitchen and my friend is working with me, we're allowed to eat a little bit. Well, I'm not allowed to, take something out of the pot and eat it. L'chura, makes sense you should be able to do it. Doesn't mean she's a gazlan. And if that's the case, you don't have a kal v'chomer that for sure she's chashid on chalipin, she's not chashid on chalipin. And if that's the case, everything that we said was reinstated. So again, the last part of that was a little bit of a left turn. What's the connection between the second part and the first part? Hashta behemtin shel tzadikim ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mevet hakol hayadam tzadikim atzmon like shkein. The Gemara told the story with Reb Zeh and Reb Asi. They were once in the pundik of Ya'i, and they were eating beitzim amutzum makos beyayin, or Asi was eating it. Reb Zera knew not to eat it, and was very disappointed why Reb Asi was nichshel and ate the mai. And he said, "Oh, must be that taruvis t'mai is different. Nafak tok v'ashkach." Hitaka found the brisa that taruvis t'mai is different. Now, what emerged from that brisa that he found was a whole discussion whether we're chayish that the amaretz is machlef or not. Sounds like there's a couple of rayas that, the Gemara knocked them all out. At the end of the day, there were specific reasons in all those cases. But really, l'chlufe, when it comes to being concerned whether or not a person would be machlef, l'chlufe loy chai shinon. So as it relates to raid, just to end with, I thought two, but we'll end with one ha'ara. And that is, so the Gemara mentioned, in its discussion of how the Chachamim, Rabbi Gamliel Beis Dinai, Rabbi Meir Beis Dinai, and then ultimately Rabbi Amir, Rabbi Asi Beis Dinai, were geyser on the Kutim, and they said that even though historically maybe we treated the Kutim as being Geirei Emes, but moving forward, Mikano Lahaba, we're going to treat them no longer as being Yid. It all started with a story where a mayor had sent his Tam Reb Shimon Elazar to go buy wine from the Kutim, and he's en route, and Ashkechei Ahu Saba. Amalei, and Ahu Saba told him, "V'samto sakim beloyecha im bal nefesh ata." And then he explained that the mus yoina matzulem beroish hagrizin shayoivnenaisa, and I'm telling you, don't buy from here. So Rav Shimon Elazar goes back, he tells his Rebbe Rameir, Rameir says, oh, I'm chayish l'miyuta. Usually chayish l'miyuta, benkach ubenkach, kriyim banim, right? We always spin it positively. But it works the other way as well. I'm chayish l'miyuta. And if some of the kutim are Ivdei Avodah Zarah, he viewed all the kutim as being Ivdei Avodah Zarah. And he said, if that's the case, we have to be chayish that maybe there's issues over here. And it was based on that. He was one of the tzaddikim in today's daf that made this gzeira on the kutim that moving forward, we're not going to treat them anymore as being yidden. Tosfos, the top Tosfos on Davav Amud Aleph says, Ashkechei Ahu Saba, Yesh Mefarshim. The Chom Makoim, Shehu Masker Ahu Saba, that every single time you find this language of Ahu Saba, who Eliyahu. You want to know who Ahu Saba is? It's referring to Eliyahu Hanavi. It says Tosfos Abavi Ef Shalom Arken. You can't say like this Yesh Mefarshim. You know why? Because if you take a look at the Gemara in Perek B'Madlikin, Shabbos Daf Lamed Daled Amud Aleph, B'Uvda de Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. You can't make this up. In the story with Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, over there Ahu Saba is mentioned, and there's no way in the world that Ahu Saba is referring to Eliyahu Hanavi. So what's this Gemara? Uvda de Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, just those words, that Tosfos wants us to look up. That's a pircha on this thesis that Ahu Saba is Eliyahu Hanavi. So the Gemara over there is at the tail end of the story of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. After Reb Shimon Bar Yochai had been hiding from the Romans for 12 years and then for another year, and then finally he came out very much b'derech nes. So the Gemara says, Reb Shimon said, being that I was zoich to such a miracle, ezel askin milsa, I want to go and I want to do something. I want to give something back to the tzibur. What's the connection between meriting a miracle and Ezen Askel Milska? So he said there's a Ma'isa, a similar one for this. The pasuk says, "Vayove Yaakov Shalom." That Yaakov came back from Padan Aram after he spent 20 years by Lavan, and he came back Shalom. Rav said, what does it mean Shalom? He was Shalom b'gufay, Shalom b'mamaynai, Shalom b'teirasai. And then the pasuk says immediately afterwards, "Vayichan es pnei oir." And Rav, the same Rav, went and said, that you know what he did? Matbeya tikkun lehem. He made coins. Shmuel said, "Shvakim tikkun lehem." He went ahead and he made streets. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Merchatzos Tikkun Lehem. So Yaakov Avinu, when he had this hergish of I want to give back Ma'oshav Lashem Kol Tag Muloi Yoloi, when he was Zoichet to Vayov Yaakov Shalom, what did he do? Vayichanas Pnei Oyer. And regardless if you learn like Rav, Shmuel, or the great Rabbi Yochanan, he did some sort of action that made life easier for the tzibur. So Rav Shimon Bar Yochai said, I see from the Zayda Yaakov Avinu, that's how you react to a miracle. When you are zoichet to a miracle, you go and you're mezakeh the rabbim, even in the simplest of ways. Rav Shimon Bar Yochai went to the Parnasim, and he told them, Ikam milsa the boyle sakune. You need a matbeya, you need a shuk, you need a merchetz, right? I want to follow in the footsteps, in the lead of the Zayda Yaakov Avinu. Is there anything in that nature and ilk that you need? They told him, now that you mention it, there's an area where there's a Safek Tumah. This will start the Kayanim Lakufa. It's very hard for the Kayanim. They always have to circumvent it and they get stuck in traffic. You know, if we can address this Safek Tumah here, you'd make life a lot easier for the Kayanim. So Rav Shimon said, I'm on it. He said, is there anyone here that knows that maybe this area is Becheskes Taira? Ahu Saba. So Ahu Saba was there and he told him, Kan Kitzes Ben Zakkai Turmasi Truma. He says, I can tell you what I know. I know that Ben Zakkai, as in Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he once was here and he was being koitzeitz, zaroinim of Turmisen that were truma. And based on that, I would suggest that there's some sort of Torah. Avadiu nami hachi. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai went and he did the same thing. And the Gemara says, Kol heichad avakashi tare, any place that the dirt was hard, Tahare, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai was Metayr, B'koleicha Davar Rafi, or wherever it was Rafi, Tzayne, he was Metzayin. Meaning there was a Safek Tumah because they knew there was Tumah in the area. The question is, where exactly was it? And he went ahead, and Rashi explains a little bit more exactly how he did this, somewhat al derech nes, but the bottom line is, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai went, and he knew what to be Metayr, and he knew what to be Metama. Amr Ahu Saba, so Ahu Saba was there, and he was Melagleg on the great Tana Reb Shimon bar Yochai. He said, Tir ben Yochai beis hakfaras. He said, Reb Shimon bar Yochai, right, whenever you refer to someone, by the way, as Ben, it's always a lashon of lag. It's funny, when the Hahu Saba said in the beginning of the Gemara, Kan kitzeitz ben Zakai, it didn't jump off the page. But here, when he's being melaglig on Reb Shimon bar Yochai, Tir ben Yochai beis hakfaras, you see it a little bit more, right? Whenever Moshe Rabbeinu, they were chatting with him, what they referred to him as Ben Amram. But the bottom line is, Tir ben Yochai beis hakfaras. Alez, Reb Shimon bar Yochai told him, you would have had a right to have said this had you not been the one that was involved and you played some sort of role in us getting to this point. You know, people are going to say Zionis get along with each other, even though Rashi says they're somewhat competitive with each other. Talmidei Chachamim like Kolshkein, and what Talmidei Chachamim are not noy kovet zeh bezeh. Yoav be'enei, he looked at him, did Reb Shimon bar Yochai, v'nach nafshei, and Ahu Saba died on the spot. Which, by the way, this is interesting because we know the story of Lag BaOmer is related to Leinagu Kovet Zeh Bezeh. That's from the Rabbi Akiva, the Talmidov perspective. Here you see the story of Reb Shimon bar Yochai is related also. Zoynois mefarchas oizu Talmidei Chachamim loy kolshkein. You're not being noy Kovet Zeh Bezeh, just a knetch. But the bottom line is Menoch Nafshe Dahu Saba says Tosfos. How could it be that the Eish Mefarshim hold the Chomokim Shu Masker Ahu Saba Hu Eliyo? It's impossible. You know why it's impossible? Because you see right here from this Maisa, there's no way there's Ahu Saba, who was Malagli Reb Shimon bar Yochai, who ended up getting the Misa of Yov Be'enei v'nach nafshei. It can't be Eliyahu Hanavi. It's impossible. So Tosfos, this is a pircha on this Yesh Mefarshim, which is interesting, because this Yesh Mefarshim is quoted a lot, certainly in our Chabura, but really, it's almost a misquote. Because if you look at Tosfos starts off Yesh Mefarshim the Chabagim Shu Masker Ahu Saba Eliyahu V'i Ef Shaloi Merkein, boom, with one sheast. Tosfos knocks out this whole hypothesis, and Tosfos has a Gemara that's l'chayra checkmate, stating that if you take a look at the Chidah in his Sefer Pesach Einayim, it's on the Gemara Masechta Shabbos Daf Lamed Dalet. The Chidah says that even though Tosfos knocked out this Yesh Mefarshim, but Tosfos did not mean to say that because of this Gemara in Shabbos Lamed Dalet, Hahu Saba is never Eliyahu Hanavi. All Tosfos meant to say was that the Yesh Mefarshim said the Chol Mokoim Shehu Masker Hahu Saba Hu Eliyahu. That I know is not true. V'aluchab Gemara in Shabbos Lamed Dalet, where for sure Hahu Saba is not Eliyahu Hanavi. But does that mean it's never Eliyahu Hanavi? Zok the Chidah, 100% that's not the case. I saw in the Netzutzei Or on Shabbos Daf Lamed Dalet. So Rabbi Reuven Margolis is mitzayim to a Medrash Hanelam. This is in Zohar Chadash. It's in Parshas Lech Lecha. It's on Daf Chof Hey, all the way in the bottom of Amar Aleph. Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon Pagabe be'Eliyahu b'diukna de Sabachada. Mefurish Zohar Chadash. He saw Eliyahu Hanavi and he looked like a Sabachada. Looked like a Husaba. That's what it means. But the bottom line is, so for sure there's a makar to the sinyan of a Husaba being Eliyahu Hanavi. All Tosfos meant to be madcha was the Chomakim Shu Masker a Husaba Eliyahu. That can't be, because connected that we have a Mefurish Gemara. Interesting for sure that on Lag BaOmer, for sure for our Chabur, that's one daf ahead, you have a mention of Uvda de Reb Shimon bar Yochai, and even Ahu Saba, which clearly played a role in the story of Reb Shimon bar Yochai. Truth is that Eliyahu Hanavi makes another appearance in that sugya, Shabbos Daf Lamed Gimel, Daf Lamed Daled, in the Uvda of Reb Shimon bar Yochai. The Gemara says that after Reb Shimon bar Yochai was in hiding together with his son, Reb Elazar Reb Shimon, they were there for 12 years. Isvu Treisa Shni b'Marasa. They spent 12 years in the Ma'ara. As Eliyahu Hanavi came, v'kam pischa de Marasa, and he stood at the entranceway of the Ma'ara. Omar, he said, Man loydei lebar Yochai, the miskaser batal gzerta. Who is going to notify Bar Yochai that the kaser died, and this point, it's free to leave. So Shimon bar Yochai and Elazar Reb Shimon, they're in the Ma'ara. Eliyahu Hanavi's right in the front. They heard it, nafku, and they left. Again, Eliyahu Hanavi playing a role in the story of Reb Shimon bar Yochai. But I want to share with you a ha'ara, a lulei de mistafina diga ha'ara, but just to be makdim, and that is, I saw in the Sefer Shari Zohar from Hagoyin Reb Ruven Margolis. So the Sefer Shari Zohar is where Reb Ruven Margolis cross-references different mamorim that we have in Nigla together with Nista. So it's on this Gemara, Shabbos Daf Lamed Aleph. Asa Eliyahu kama pischa de marasa. Zok Reb Ruven Margolis. This idea that you find Eliyahu Navi was standing at the Pesach is a theme that you'll notice you're going to find very often. Melachim Aleph, Perik Yotes, Pasuk Yud Gimel. Vayihi kishmaya Eliyahu. Vayolet Ponov Ba'adartoi, Vayetze, Vayamoy Pesach HaMa'ara, Vihine Elov Koil, Vayomer Malach HaFoy Eliyahu. So where is Eliyahu Hanavi standing? Vayomoy Pesach HaMa'ara. The Gemara says in Masechtas Brachos Daf Gimel Amud Aleph. This is one of the very, very first Gemaras in Shas. Tanya, Rabbi Yosi said, I was once traveling on the road, and I entered one of the churvas of Yerushalayim, L'spalel to daven. Eliyahu Zachal HaTov, Eliyahu Navi Zachal HaTov came, V'shamar li al HaPesach, and he waited for me by the Pesach of the Ma'ara. V'himtin li ad shesiyamti tefillah, lachash shesiyamti, and the Gemara tells the whole story. But where was Eliyahu Navi standing? Where was he waiting? He was waiting for him by the Pesach of the Ma'ara. Another famous Gemara. Gemara Masechtas Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadik Ches Amud Aleph. Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Ashkach L'Eliyahu, Davi Kaimi Apischa de Ma'arta de Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Yeshua ben Levi saw Eliyahu Hanavi, and he was where? He was at the Pesach of the Ma'ara of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, and he asked him, "Am I asino la'alma da'asi? Right? Am I going to be zoichet ha'olam haba?" And then he told him, "Emas asi Mashiach." So he told him, "Go ask him." And by the way, where was Mashiach? Ve'echa Yosef. He told him, "Apischa de Karta." He's at the entranceway of the city of Rome. But where was Eliyahu Hanavi? Eliyahu Hanavi again was at the entranceway of a Ma'ara. Which Ma'ara? The entranceway of the Ma'ara of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, the Ma'ara in Meron. There's a Medrash Mishlei. This is Perik Tes. This is talking about after the Ptira of Rabbi Akiva. Be'Eliyahu. Va'amad al Pesach Beisai shel Rabbi Yeshua Hagarsi. He was standing al Pesach Beisai shel Rabbi Yeshua Hagarsi. This is a Zohar Chadash in Parshas Kisavai. Daf Nun Tes. Ad hachi asa Eliyahu zal Chami de Bacha. Ad hacha avar chad rucha va'afrishlan Solik Eliyahu gav Gilgal denura v'ishtar Reb Shimon ubachi v'admach apischa de marasa ad hachi yas Eliyahu. He was standing by the Pesach of the Ma'ara, Reb Shimon, and who shows up to meet Reb Shimon by the Pesach of the Ma'ara? Eliyahu Hanavi. And again, Omar, he said, Kum Reb Shimon, Ita Mishnascha, Zaka, Sulkachas, Mamish, a real Rashbi, Meron, Diga, Zayar. But the bottom line is, where does Eliyahu Navi see Reb Shimon Bar Yochai? He saw in the Pesach of the Ma'ara. So it says Reb Ruven Margolis, Kedarka, this is classic Reb Ruven Margolis. So you have a Gemara over here, Shabbos Daf Lamed Gimel, where the Gemara says that Eliyahu Navi was able to, he was the one that was notified. He came with the Pseiros Toivus, tell Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, plus Reb Shimon, to come out of the Ma'ara. So where did he go to him? He stood on the Pesach, and he just made this hachraza. He just made this hachraza. He didn't walk in. He stood at the Pesach. Zog, Reb Ruven Margolis, take a look at Melachim Aleph Yutes that he's standing by the Pesach of a Ma'ara, and take a look at Brachos Daf Gimel, he's by the Pesach of the Churva, and take a look in Sanhedrin Daf Tzadik Ches, where again he's at the Pesach of the Ma'ara of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai in Meron, and take a look at Medrash Mishlei Perik Tes, where he's standing by the Pesach, the door of Yeshua Garsi, and take a look at that fire, the Gezoyer Chadash, where he goes to Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and he tells him, "Wake up from your sleep. You know what a schus you're going to have." And again, where is he? He's at the Pesach. So you see there, Eliyahu Hanavi always appears by a Pesach. Ad kan l'shoynes. I just had one hergish, and maybe this is a little bit emes, I don't know. But either way, we know that by the Leil HaSeder, the minig is that when we say Shvoich HaMoschel Agayim, so we go and we open up the door. We open up the door. Now, why do we open up the door? So the Pashup Shat, the reason that we open up the door is because it's brought down in Shulchan Aruch. It's to show that it's Leil Shimurim. And being that it's Leil Shimurim and Amazikin, usually you wouldn't open up your door in the middle of the night. But we open up our door to show Leil Shimurim. Now we do it when we pour the fourth kais. It's Yidua from the Beis Halevi. He said because 4 is really Zugas. And the Gemara asks the Kasha, you do Zugas? We never do Zugas. There it is, Leil Shimurim and Amazikin. So when you're Moizgan Kais Revi, that's the appropriate time to show that today is a Leil Shimurim. But Al Kapanim, that's what the Yid does. But Avada, we know from all the Chassidish Svarim that the Indian of opening up the door by Shveicha Maschal Agoyim is being Maskal Eliyahu Hanavi. And not just that, the tzaddikim used to go to the door and they used to greet Eliyahu Hanavi. And that's this Indian that people was like to give Eliyahu by the Leila Seder, related to the Kaishal Eliyahu. But it always bothered me. You have to open the door for Eliyahu Hanavi. However Eliyahu Hanavi got from the West Coast to the East Coast, he'll figure out a way to get into your dining room. What's Pashup Shah? Eliyahu Hanavi's traveling all over the world. By the way, it's not a Litzanis. We know the Chasam Sofer in the Tshuva says, how's he allowed to go chutz l'tchum? This is a real thing. He's traveling, he's getting miles, he's flying all over the place. So you have to walk him into the house, mechatesi. Well, okay, it's a nice thing. You have a chashuv guest, you greet him. That's the Pashup Shah. But you're not allowed him out. Right? You're not malav him out. So why do you greet him in if you're not malav him out? But it could be there's an oimek. Because you know where Eliyahu Hanavi is. Eliyahu Hanavi is a pischa de beisa. He always appears by the Pesach. Shveicha Maschal Agoyim. You go to the Pesach of your bias and you hope that you're going to be zoicha to see Eliyahu Hanavi, who's going to be mavas psuras tovis. I just want to end with one thing. Ahu Saba comes up a lot in Shas, right? Ahu Saba, right? Comes up all the time. We always give it a shout out. So we know it comes out all the time. I looked in the Toldos Tanan V'Ameiram. This is under Samach, Erech Saba. He counts all the times that you find Ahu Saba in Shas. Brachas Daf Hey, Brachas Daf Ches, Brachas Mem Gimel, Shabbos Chav Gimel, Shabbos Lamed Dalet, Shabbos Tzadik Hey, Shabbos Kuf Yud Tes, Shabbos Kuf Mem Aleph, Psachim Tes Vav, Nun Gimel, Sukkah Nun Beis, Tainus Chaf Aleph, that's the story with Ilf and Rabbi Yochanan. Chagiga Chaf Hey, Ksubah Samach Beis, that's with Rabbi Akiva and his wife. Gittin Ayin Vav, Kedushin Yud Beis, Kedushin Ayin Aleph, Bava Basra Ayin Hey, Sanhedrin Daf Kuf Avodah Lamed Zayin, Makis Yud Aleph, Makis Yud Tes, Vachim Yud Beis, Menachas Chaf Ches, Lamed Zayin, Mem Gimel, Chulin Daf Vav, today's Daf, Chulin Chaf Ches, Kuf Chaf Aleph, Nida Daf Ches, Nida Daf Tes, and Nida Daf Chav Zayin. Count it. You know how many times it says Ahu Sab in Shas? Can't make it up. It says it 33 times in Shas. I don't know. But either way, Ahu Saba plays a role in the story of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Eliyahu Hanavi plays a role in the story of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai. Ahu Saba is Eliyahu Hanavi. And like the Chidah said, that even though Taisus was doichet, but Taisus just meant to say it's not kol mokoim. But Avad Ahu Saba is Eliyahu Hanavi. And today, on the 30th day of the Omer, we counted 33 days in the Omer. The 33 day Ahu Sabas, we should be zoicha that Ahu Saba, Eliyahu Hanavi, should be megal himself on the Pesach of all of our batim, and it should be mevaseh psuras toivus, the biyaskoil tzedek, the meher b'yameinu amei v'amei.